Okay, hopefully we're recording. So anyway, well, welcome. And Heather, I see you've joined us. If you can unmute your microphone and unmute your camera, we can see you and say hi. So I'm going to confess I've used Zoom with John when I've connected with John, but I haven't ever used it a lot from the manager's side. So you're going to have to bear with me at least. Jessie seems to be more adept at this than I.
No, this is new for both of us, Sylvia. It's easy to click the join button.
This is the first time that I've used Zoom too, and what I noticed is if you hover over your little picture at the top or the spot where your name is, then you get the option to mute or unmute yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking all over the place for a more prominent mute button, and it does not show up until you hover over your picture.
Does it? How about if you go to the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen? Does the row of icons show up then?
Only when I get over the pictures at the top.
Okay.
So I can't. Oh no, there's a big mute button at the bottom. I just wasn't looking in the lower left corner.
Yeah,
okay,
if you
good.
Scroll all the way to the bottom.
Yep.
On the left-hand side.
Hi, Devin.
Devin. She's another North Dakotan.
Yahoo! Yeah. All right.
There's a few of you.
Yeah. Hey, Devin.
Hey.
If you unmute your mic, there we go. We should be able to hear you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
I have to admit that I'm going to have to leave early. I was so excited when I saw the time, and then yesterday I realized Central Time. I have a class that starts here at 2 o'clock Eastern Time.
Oh, sure.
So it's a lab. They're just down the hall, and I told them they should start without me if I'm a little bit late.
So, well, it is 12:01, so we can probably get started. And then if people join, we'll just let them chime in. So,
Hi.
Hi, Heather.
I'm upstairs from Jessie. Yeah, 5 floors up. Yes.
All right. Sounds good. So, all right. Well, here we go. It's our first meeting. So, Jessie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Do you want to go through tech?
I can, yeah. So, welcome everybody. There's about, how many would you say participants?
Probably about 20.
So this represents a smaller part of the total number of folks who signed up, and there's also going to be some folks who are participating but can't join us for these meetings. So hopefully we'll get the recordings out and you can participate remotely or asynchronously if you can't join us today in person. So a couple of tools you folks have already discovered. You can either put your cursor to the bottom of the screen and you should see a microphone. If you look on the screen right now, Jessie took a screenshot of that. So a microphone, if you click on your microphone, you can mute it. And then you can click again to unmute it. So I think most of you are muted except for Jessie and I at this point in time. Also for video, if you go take a look at the video, you can either turn your video on or off. And right now it's great to see all of your faces. I actually like to see who I'm talking to. But if you want to eat lunch or you don't want us to see you, then, you know, or sometimes too, if the video starts to cut out and you have a hard time connecting, if you could turn the video off, sometimes you can maintain the integrity of your connection So there's that. Then finally, the other button we need to look at today is the chat button. So if you folks want to try clicking on your chat button, and you should get a window that comes up and you should be able to type a message. And there we go. So Arity, I see you said howdy, and Sandra and Kristen, I see you. So this is where you can chat. So if while we're talking you have questions, I can try to answer them while Jesse's talking. Likewise, if I'm talking, Jesse can try and look and see and try to answer your questions. So those are the main features that we're going to be using today. And we'll do our best then to keep the meeting flowing. So any of you have any questions about the features and controls that we're going to use today? All right. So with that then, Jesse, it's back to you.
Okay. So this is your official welcome to our community of practice. We're super excited that you're willing to kind of experiment with us. We haven't done this mode of sharing. Usually it's been face-to-face. So the first thing I want to do is just normalize experimentation and say we're going to try new things and we're going to learn together, and we're not always going to have the answers. In fact, I've never built a website, and now you have one that I've built. So please give me feedback if things aren't working. So this community of practice is going to run from September to May. It's going to be a kind of academic year-long journey, and it is fully online, which you've discovered. So the magical thing about communities of practice is the engagement. So what you bring to the table is really important. What you have to share is really important. So I just want to say, don't hold back. In the online meetings, the first online meeting of the month will typically be more of a webinar style information from, one-way push from us to you. And then the second meeting of the month is typically going to be a little bit more interactive. We're hoping to be able to put you into breakout groups to discuss, and as you get further into applying what you're learning in your learning design, you're going to be able to kind of troubleshoot with each other and try out new ideas there. So the outcome, let's just talk through the shape of what we're heading towards together. Our goal, our outcome is to establish a supportive environment to experiment with these two frameworks. So you may be here because you've heard of the RSD, the Research Skills Development Framework. You may be here because you're a little bit more familiar with the Framework for Information Literacy from ACRL. And we're actually going to be trying to integrate both of them throughout the year. And applying them and seeing what connections we can make and things that we can try. So here's our learning goals for you. And really, if you boil these down, they all have to do with being reflective teaching practitioners, and also applying what we learned right away in our own context, and then being scholarly, engaging in scholarship of teaching and learning, which is simply going back and assessing and getting feedback about what we're doing and how we're doing it to influence what we do next. And then sharing that. At the end, we'll talk about how we kind of take this one level out and we disseminate the things that we've found. So how do we make this work? When it's not face-to-face, the burden is on the individuals a little bit more to engage, because we can't just sit in a room together. So making sure that you can show up as much as you can. We understand that there are scheduling issues sometimes, and that's totally okay. Just communicate with us, and we'll record as much as we can and keep everybody engaged. Try to be prepared, as we have outlined certain assignments for everybody to do, just making sure that you're working through that. And then definitely having fun. Like, we can't experiment with new ideas unless we're enjoying the process. So infuse some fun into it. I'm Jessie Polzer, to introduce myself, and I am the instruction librarian at University of Wisconsin-Stout. Sylvia and I have been working together for 3 or 4 years now around the Research Skills Development Framework, and we found that our relationship, the relationship between librarians and instructors, it's producing a lot of fruit for us. And so we're hoping to connect you with each other as well, the instructors and the librarians, and capitalize on that at your institutions. So Sylvia, do you want to say a little bit about your experience with RSD? And
Sure. So thanks, Jessie. So I'm Sylvia Tiala. I'm also here at UW-Stout. I'm in the School of Education. I've been working with the RSD for, like Jessie, for about 4 years. John Willison actually encouraged us when we started our first community of practice here at Stout to get a librarian on board, and it was the best advice that he could have given us. So I've worked with Jessie using the RSD, trying to make my assignments in my own classroom more transparent and clearer. And then I've worked with some faculty across the campus in a community of practice, and then just working with them to provide a bit of advice here and there. I've also taken the RSD and used it in K-12 settings with teachers and tried to get them to engage their students in problem solving. So I found the framework useful for that as well. And I have to give Jessie a lot of credit. She has, her input with the information literacy framework has really brought clarity both to assignments and assessments, and has made me a better teacher. So I'm pretty passionate about the framework. I like it.
awesome. So before we head into actually introducing the frameworks, which is most of what we're going to do today, I just want to show you around our website a little bit and make sure everybody's on the same page as to how to navigate and how things are organized. So here's our website. Things are organized into modules a little bit like a learning management system. You can get some modules up here, or typically it floats to the side as well. I just want you to notice there's a news bar that's more like a blog that we can update. Just make a habit of maybe checking there. We'll post opportunities or any changes to the schedule. There's also a calendar. So that calendar, you should be able to download it or add it into your Outlook or into your Google Calendar. And any changes will be reflected there as well. The forums are just like discussion posts in a learning management system. So when you come to the website, the first thing I want you to check besides the news is to head into the module for the day or for that week. Typically, actually, we're going in 2 to 3 week blocks of time. And I'm hoping that most of you have already worked through the start here. And if you haven't, take a look at this. It just talks about, you've already done a couple things, right? Checked your tech. Hopefully you've already been in our Flipgrid. We're doing some introductions in Flipgrid, which there are instructions for here. So if you haven't introduced yourself via Flipgrid, try to get that done this week so that we can move forward as a crew and get to know each other. Other than that, the dates are set for when these modules open. So this module is already open, and this is the module that includes today's online meeting. You can see that here. This is today's online meeting. But it also has some contextualizing documents and some assignments right inside the module. Getting to those frameworks, introducing yourself over Flipgrid, and then making some recommendations about work groups. If you have some preferences about who you might want to work with in a work group, go ahead and fill out this form. And then pointing to our first discussion question. And then there's a due date, just so we can kind of all keep tracking with each other about when you want to post and when you want to read by. And then it moves into our next module. Any questions about the website? No? Okay. Well, we're going to keep moving. All right, Sylvia, you want to talk about what we're going to cover today?
Right, so today we have 5 things on our to-do list. So we're going to share our experiences. I'm guessing that all of you are here because you're interested in the RSD or information literacy and you have some experience with it and with students using it or experience with students not using it. We're going to introduce the Research Skill Development Framework from my perspective, and then Jesse's going to talk about information literacy and that framework. We're going to then end our session with preparation for the next meeting, some things we really need you to do so we can come back and engage with each other. And then any questions you have, we'll do our best to answer those before we sign off. So we've scheduled an hour and a half for time on Zoom, but we're trying to keep the meetings around an hour, so we'll see how that goes. But we do have extra time built in if we need it. Alrighty, so Jesse.
Yeah, I am trying to type in the link to the Padlet in chat. I hope I got all the way to the end.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have been doing that.
That's okay. I think I got it.
Okay.
So you should be able to click on that link in chat and enter the password RSD 2018. And what we actually just want you to do today is complain a little bit. This is, we found this is a cathartic way to start conversations about research skills, to kind of talk about what do students struggle with when they're trying to do research, when they've gotten the assignment from us, and there's just hiccups along the way. What frustrates you about engaging that process with students? And what you'll do is get into that Padlet, click on a plus sign, and we just have them columned so that we're not overlapping each other, and go ahead and start entering little frustrations and big frustrations. What do students struggle with?
You can enter more than one as well, so they should show up for you. Hopefully you see what's on the screen in your Padlet. You should be able to see each other's comments as you type.
You're missing a 22 in the link.
Am I?
So it should be Tialis/22.
Yep.
All right.
Yes, there it is.
Did you grab it? There we go.
All right, good.
Do that.
And what's the password again?
RSD 2018.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I sit on a ball all day, so if I'm bouncing, that's why.
And I'm looking at a 1918 Scientific American for an exhibit on the side here, so that's why I'm swaying back and forth.
Nice. Heather is an archivist.
Yeah, if anybody can see.
She has a unique perspective as well.
Yes.
Kristen, you posted not enough time. Is that not enough time for you to do research in your course or for students to complete it, or? Okay, so I'm looking at students are overwhelmed by the scope of the projects. Not enough time from both the teaching and the student perspective. It looks like one of the comments is to open our modules sooner. So Christy, you work at a two-year institution. I'm waiting for the rest to come in. Seems like there's a lot of work that faculty, students, and curriculum skipping. They don't know how to plan a project or come up with a topic in the first place. Yep. Yep, lots of issues for students. Okay. Big expectations from faculty. Anything else? Okay, so it seems like time is a big one. Okay, good. They're presenting or they're doing a project and then it goes nowhere. All right. Students get overwhelmed. Yep, I've seen the students deer in the headlight look before. Okay. Yep. Okay. So we're looking at things like students don't have the time. They get overwhelmed. They don't necessarily have the skills, and it's difficult to finish the whole research process. So, great. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. Did I miss any then?
I don't think so.
All right. So thank you for your comments. That helps put things in perspective for us and gives us a place to start. So Jessie, I think maybe it's time to start talking about the frameworks.
Mm-hmm. Did your screen update? I switched the slide.
Nope, it didn't. So yeah, okay, I'm sorry. So I'm looking at no, it did. So I'm going to be staring into my computer, just waiting. I'm going to be talking about the Research Skill Development Framework, which I think some of you are familiar with. And the Research Skill Development Framework was introduced by John Willison and Carrie O'Regan around 2007. And I believe that we have a reading assigned for you. They talk about what's commonly known, commonly not known, and totally unknown for students. And they also, tying back to your comments, look at research as a process. So it's not just one assignment in one classroom, one time, but it actually, or hopefully, is learning the process in multiple contexts across multiple courses during their time at a university or in a K-12 school or in life. So the more they practice with it, the more they get familiar with it. And if you can make the framework visible for them, then they have something to fall back on, or that they know when they're going to go do a project. So on the next slide is the Research Skill Development Framework, and we've asked you to go, there's a link, Jessie has a link on her website for you to go to this page and download it. And I'm going to ask that you do that, not right now, but before the next time, so that you really start to understand and reference it as we move through this next year. So if you look at the RSD framework, you're going to notice the X and the Y axis. And as we take a look at the Y axis, hang on a second, there we go. As we take a look at the y-axis, what we're looking at is we're looking at different skills that research entails, and they're skills that Wilson and O'Regan found occur across contexts. So it doesn't matter whether you're teaching math or science or English or engineering. There's a number of skills that everybody does when they solve a problem or do research. So one of them, for example, is embark and clarify. You need to know what the problem is that you're going to solve. and you're going to start investigating it. Then there is the second facet then, or one of the other facets. In just a moment, I need to grab my framework. It's bigger than the one on the screen. So then another item is finding and generating. So after you know what the problem is, you need to go and find the information that'll help you solve the problem or generate it. So you might need to do surveys, you might need to go do a literature search. It looks different for different disciplines, but the process is the same. Then the next item is evaluating and reflecting. So is this information good? Are the sources reputable? Did the data I collect make sense? So you'll take a look at that. At some point in time, you're going to need to organize and manage all of the data you have. So you're going to need to put things in spreadsheets or put it into forms the statistical analysis programs can manage. You're going to need to do annotated bibliographies. You're going to need to manage your data. Then at some point in time toward the end of the process, you're going to need to analyze and synthesize, so bring everything you found together into some sort of uniform whole. And then, as you folks said, sometimes it's hard to get folks to communicate and apply that, but at some point in time you need to communicate out what you have found. So those are the facets of research. Those are the things that everybody does. And then, are there questions on those facets? All right, so then along the x-axis on the top, it's the level of student autonomy. So this is how much freedom you're going to give your students, or that your students choose to take. And so as you take a look at the columns, there's a red column, an orange column, a yellow column, green and blue. It's when people start to look at this, the first thing they do is they look at this as a rubric, and this is not a rubric. What it is, it's a framework to determine what level of thinking, what level of responsibility, what level of independence do your students have at any given time. So an incoming freshman, for example, isn't going to jump in on the first day of class and say, oh, I'm ready to go do a research project all by myself and I don't need any help from you. And you as an instructor may not feel comfortable doing that. So the red column is really talking about prescribed research. So, and this is where you give students step-by-step directions. Here's what you do. Here's what you do next. Here's what you do again. And you step them through the different parts of the research process, but it's very much teacher-led. Then bounded research is the orange level. So this is where you as faculty would set some boundaries, but give them a little more autonomy. You'll give them a task that says go to the library, but maybe you'll give them a range of things to choose from. You won't have it so locked down. Scaffolding is where you're going to give them the process and here's what you do next, but maybe give them a little more freedom and choice of topic, what they're going to choose, maybe have them choose how they're going to do the research. They just get more choices. Finally, the last two are self-actuated research, where students can choose their own project and need less and less help from you. So again, one is not better than the other, but you really need to figure out where you're comfortable with and where your students are going to be comfortable. And so the framework for me has been useful because it does a number of things. First of all, when Jesse and I started in a community of practice, we had teachers from all different colleges participating. And it really provided us a way to break out of the cycle of, do you do research? Yep, I do research. What does it look like? That's not what it looks like for me. We need to come up with a definition. Do you do research? So we were in that cycle for a long time. This provides a way to talk to people across context. Here's where I do research. Here's what it looks like in my classroom. So that's one of the things. It's also scalable. So I've used this and seen others use it for an assignment. So one of the things to be mindful of is that in an assignment, I might only be targeting Embark and Clarify. I might not target the whole framework, and it's okay to just use one piece of the framework and not try to cram everything in all at one time. So it's scalable at the class level. It's scalable then at an assignment level, at the course level. How can I embed research skills across multiple assignments? At the program level, how can we scaffold research skills while the students are in the program? And then we've even had it used for evaluation at the college level, and I don't know, I'm sure I think there's some examples that John Willison has posted of a whole university going at it. So it's actually very scalable. The other thing, and Jesse I know will laugh, because in our first community of practice, a number of us got together and had complaints similar to what we're seeing that you folks had, plus some additional ones. And as we started writing out assignments, we found out that we were assigning research types of assignments in the red column or the orange column, but then we would turn around and want students to perform at the green or blue level, and we were having them make leaps above what skills they had. So it was good for aligning our assessments with our instruction. And then again, like I said, it really helps put into perspective this idea of research is developmental. So in the red, if you have students going after research skills on the red column, that ties back to Willison and O'Regan's article about what's already known or what's commonly known, and then what's totally unknown. So you might have students do something that's commonly known and direct them to the answer and be operating in the red column, but it's developing their research skills at a level that's developmentally appropriate for them. So I really found this, again, to be useful in really refining the way I teach and the instruction for my students. Questions?
For those of you who used this framework, in what ways have you used it? You can go ahead and unmute yourself if you're comfortable.
Have any of you used it? Whoop. Catherine, we can't hear you.
We don't use it, anything as structured as this, but it is very similar to how we structure basically our daily activities in our introductory courses, looking at how much information we give them. And at the beginning of the semester, we're very much in column, the red column, where we're just like lots of very quick questions that we're going to ask them to just look and figure out answers for. And then as we get to the end of the semester, then we're much more in the level 5, where they might have a day-long activity that they're supposed to be working on, but maybe it's only got a paragraph of introduction, as opposed to at the beginning of the semester when their activity would be like 4 or 5 pages of questions. So this is really nice for me to see, and I noticed this when I came to the talk that you folks gave at OPID, I think. Last spring. I was really impressed with this, just articulating all of that and putting it together into a really nice graphic that we can use. And there are definitely situations where, you know, maybe we skipped level 2 and 3 in the, you know, over the problem solving pieces. and could go back and figure that piece out again. And then I want to point out just the iterative process of all of this, like just because they're at one point, you know, maybe they might be on level 5 at the embark and clarify, but they might still be at level 1 on the communicate and apply. And that's been one of our challenges, is to kind of figure out where are they coming into our classes and where do we want them to be leaving it.
I think something, the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy will bring this out a little bit more, but something we need to acknowledge is that you may be working at a level, and level 5, typically undergraduates never get there, right? This is like, I've come up with my own research question, kind of out of my own passion and my own expertise, and I am framing all the tools I'm going to use and scoping it myself. So it would be very, very rare for an undergraduate to work at a level 5 at all. But you know, we may, as academics, work at a level 5 in our own context, but if I were to switch disciplines, so I'm trained as a psychologist, and I dip into kind of anthropological methods by passion, but if I were to try to work in a biology type question, I might be back here, because the tools, the way you embark and clarify is different. The tools you use to find and generate are different. So some of this is contextually bounded in a way. I don't know if that's helpful or makes sense, but.
And that's why we work with librarians, because they can help articulate these great ideas.
Sandra, did you have some comments? We can't hear you. I'm not sure why.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I've used it extensively in curriculum development and with courses in research at the beginning, middle, and end levels. And I have to respectfully say, I think that our students do get to level 5, but it's because of the intentionality. And I was working along these lines before I met John and before I got the research skills development framework, but I brought it home and showed it to everybody else here. And being intentional about scaffolding and building experiences does allow us to get the students up pretty much level 5 open research. And our students sometimes don't have to do a master's thesis because people look at their undergraduate thesis and say, wow. Although most of them choose to do another thesis because they like research and they know it's a good thing for them to do by then. So I find it very useful. And as I put on the board over there, the biggest problem is I have a hard time getting colleagues to adapt it because they look at all of these different parts and they think it's too much. And it is too much for a single assignment or even a single course. But that's not how it was meant to be used. It was meant to be used as a developmental framework, which is why development's in there. Over time, and if we have them for 4 years, we can get there.
Awesome.
Thanks, Catherine.
And I do think that this framework gives us a good understanding of thinking about things according to what the course objective is. You know, a lot of times people who want to use my collections in the archives are just like, let's teach students how to use a primary resource. But in reality, they need to be thinking about, okay, do we want them to just be sweeping across the collection back and forth, or are we more in the orange category? If we're in that bounded research category and we have 5 or 6 choices that they can look at, then they can think about what it is that they're supposed to be learning within their course and how this resource applies to it. And so, yeah, I do a lot of my work within the orange category just because of the support work that I do and the complexity of my collections.
Awesome. Anybody else want to chime in before we switch gears? Okay.
Go for it.
All right. Okay, so we're going to switch out of this overview of the Research Skill Development Framework, and I want to introduce you to the Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education. So ACRL, the Association of College and Research Libraries, this framework comes out of ACRL, which librarians, you know, yay, ACRL, it's one of our biggest associations, and a lot of our thought work that defines what we do comes out of that association. They, in 2010, developed information literacy standards. And if you ever looked at them, they look just like learning objectives. If the information literate person will be able to, you know, locate a scholarly article, ask a researchable question. So a lot of those learning objectives that we probably would still write because we need them in order to inform good learning design. But as we kind of moved through using those standards and working with instructors to teach information literacy and integrate it into courses, we found that things were still kind of missed. Like, students were still struggling in a way that was not described by those standards. And so a few years ago, a few librarians got together and started asking the question, well, how do we describe the reasons why students are really struggling to be information literate and to navigate and kind of engage with this multimodal information ecosystem that's just kind of exploding. And so what they did was they found a learning theory called threshold concepts, and they decided to define information literacy according to threshold concepts. So I need to introduce you to threshold concepts before I can actually introduce you to the threshold concepts of information literacy. So threshold concepts were first, you can see the citation down at the bottom, first talked about from Meyer and Land in about 2003. A little bit before that, you can find evidence of it. But threshold concepts are the ideas in a contextualized system. We call them discipline, probably ideas in a discipline that are transformative. And the threshold is like the portal. And once you cross the portal of understanding that one concept, it kind of opens up the whole world of that disciplinary system to you. And the threshold, as you can see here, the threshold concepts are bounded in those contextualized systems. So I can't go over to biology and really read academic literature in biology because I don't understand the fundamental premises of that underpin that thought system. But in psychology, I could, or in information science, I could. So these threshold concepts, they're transformative. You can see, I don't know if you're familiar with Doctor Who. It's like bigger on the inside. So they're transformative. They kind of transform the way the person sees the whole system. Like, they can never see it the same again. They're totally irreversible. They're bounded within that system. They're integrative, which means all of a sudden, not only do they understand that one concept, but these 4, 5, 6 concepts over here, they can see the connections between them now because they cross the threshold of that one concept. And they're typically troublesome because they're robust, they're integrative, they're fundamental in that way. This is also, threshold concepts are another way of describing a developmental process for a student. They're not a good way to describe how students learn. They're not that kind of learning theory, but they give us a picture of, first of all, the foundational thoughts within a system, and then maybe the process a student might move through and feel through as they're crossing that threshold. So there's different ways you can support each developmental piece of the process. That liminal is like you're right upon that threshold and you are in the act of crossing over. You're in the act of starting to understand that concept. So preliminal would be everything before that, you know, maybe everything in your experience, but also as an instructor, how you build up to that concept. That's the development before they cross, and then while they cross, and then after they cross. And what I really like about this as a framework for understanding development is it makes room for, they call it post-liminal variation, which we know that students won't always grasp a thing obviously the same way because they're attaching that concept to things that they know from before, from prior experiences, and we're taught to scaffold our learning and teaching that way so that they can make those relationships as they understand things. So this is a way of understanding that they're not always going to end up at the same place, and to make room for that in our assessment while still being able to assess what they know and understand in relation to what they need to know and understand to move ahead. Any questions about threshold concepts? I'm hoping that you're starting to get ahas, as in like, oh, I understand the threshold concepts in whatever your expertise is. Yeah. Yep. Good.
Is there some personal element to these threshold concepts as well? Like there are the bigger ones that are field specific, but are there smaller ones where students might have that aha moment, like this is their threshold and it might not be the same across the board?
That's an interesting question. I haven't really thought about that. In some ways, I almost feel like identity formation, I'm getting all psychological on you. Identity formation is kind of a form of threshold concept.
Yeah. That
place where we identify with something, or we understand the world in a certain way, and it changes how we see the whole world because of that. So there are things that we would have personally because of our own experience and the way that we've learned things. There are things that we share with different groups. So the threshold concepts that I share academically with kind of my academic family would be different than the threshold concepts that I maybe share with my family or other groups that I'm associated with, that I identify with. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. I guess to give you some background to my question,
Okay.
I teach primarily physics, but I also do a little bit of history and philosophy, and I work a lot with psychologists, the psychology folks on our campus too. So, and in talking to my students, my physics students primarily, like I could tell you what the threshold concepts are kind of overarching for physics. But in talking to my freshman physics majors, or my freshman students who are taking physics but are not physics majors, like the critical concept that suddenly makes everything click for them is not the same for each one.
Interesting.
And so it'll be something like, for one student, they're working on a piece and they suddenly understand how acceleration and velocity work together. And then that allows them to understand forces. And for other students, they might just bungle along through, velocity and acceleration and get into forces, but forces will be the thing that clicks them back to understanding. So I'm curious about just that individualized component to these threshold concepts.
Yes.
And how that might play into stuff.
Yeah, I think you're going to see that as I describe the information literacy threshold concepts, because you'll see that they're separate, but that they're related, and one could certainly be the entrance point into another one.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments before we move ahead? Okay, so what are the threshold concepts of information literacy? And I will say ACRL would say there are more of them. These are the ones they developed in 2015, and we're kind of exploring as a field right now. So the first one I'm going to talk about is information creation as a process. So if you think about students engaging in research tasks, and you think about people who are information literate and can move around in information ecosystems flexibly, the first thing they might try to understand is information creation is a process. So students often, as librarians, we know they often say, just give me that one thing that answers my question, as if knowledge magically appeared or was like discovered. And they don't necessarily understand the nuances of how information in its published, accessible form is actually created. And so the questions that were asked, the tools that were used, and how it was made accessible all impacts what they're seeing in front of them, and to kind of situate that rhetorically. So first of all, to use that knowledge to find appropriate information, but then to also use that knowledge of information creation to interpret that information. The second one we'll talk about is research as inquiry. I hear a lot from professors this general frustration that students don't think like us. They don't think like academics. And that they don't engage research and question asking as a more open-ended process with that mindset of inquiry. And there's definitely frustration there because we've crossed the threshold of seeing problem solving and information seeking as inquiry, and we tend to just be a group of maybe more curious by nature people, and that's why we've chosen the field that we're in. And it's more difficult for us to scaffold and help bring them in, even if they're willing to be brought into that mindset. Scholarship as a conversation. This again goes back to students wanting to maybe find that one perfect thing that answers their question, not understanding that they're actually entering the middle of a conversation, and that conversation has many voices. That conversation has a timeline, and so they have a hard time situating the information they're finding within that timeline, and understanding that it's not just like an encyclopedia where the answer is just given to them. Authority is constructed and contextual. So kind of akin to scholarship is conversation. That conversation is made up of voices, and different communities, different academic communities, just like any other social community, will elevate some voices over others, and they do that based on their own set of criteria. So that authority that's given to certain sources and certain voices, it's constructed socially and it's contextualized within that system. Sometimes we don't like to deal with that fact, but that is how it's done. Information has value. You know, on the lighter side, just this disconnect between why would I go to a library database when I can find everything on Google? Well, they don't understand that information creation has a process, and they also don't understand that information has value, and it's used for a variety of purposes. The use of a blog could be academic, it could be marketing, it could be a lot of different things. And so they don't necessarily look at information having different purposes and different values, and maybe even having multiple at one time. Like, this blog was written for this purpose, but now I'm going to bring it into my academic discussion and kind of change its purpose. Searching as strategic exploration. So this kind of goes back, relates to a little bit that inquiry mindset, being a little bit more open in that searching process, kind of getting messy and letting it be a little bit messy, but also having it be strategic. So the iterative nature of information searching, and how, you know, as a librarian, obviously we're trained to take those results and change the search. And as academics, you do it all the time. You do it without even thinking. You change your approach to the question based on what you found in the last iteration. So those are the information literacy threshold concepts from ACRL as they're set right now. And my guess is, as you start to think about how your students approach research tasks, you're probably going to discover a few more of them as you go. And I would love for you to share those back with us. Any questions or comments about these? Okay. All right. So that's kind of our general introduction to the two frameworks. And one is probably going to come more, just more naturally to you than the other. And we're going to, in the fall, we're really going to focus on engaging with the Research Skills Development Framework. And it's not till about February that we're going to start really digging into these threshold concepts and how they might change how we plan and how we see the world. But if you're starting to get into your project, developing your project, which we do more in the fall, and you know that you want to maybe use these threshold concepts a little bit more robustly before we even get to them in February, let me know and we can kind of talk through what that might look like and dig into them a little bit more, a little bit sooner. All right.
Any comments from any of you so far?
I think the coffee is wearing off.
Yeah. So we're at the point then where I think we're going to wrap up with a couple of items. So for next time, we want you to read Wilson and O'Regan's article, Commonly Known, Commonly Not Known, and Totally Unknown. It might help put this in perspective for you. We need you to go online and make sure you get your Flipgrid introductions done. And then if you have a group you want to work in, we've been considering whether or not we are going to put you in groups according, to interest or according to geographical locations. So if you have a preference, let us know. There's a discussion forum for you to do, and the next module we'll have up and running by Friday, September 21st. And then our next face-to-face meeting is going to be on Tuesday, the 25th.
Yeah, I just want to break in, Sylvia. I noticed that there were a couple questions in our Padlet about how these modules open and having some more time.
Yep.
This module opened on 9/7, but we have almost 2 weeks to do it. So don't feel like you have to have all these things done before the online meeting. That's not really how they're set up. We'll keep discussing after this meeting all the way until the 21st. I hope that kind of clears up the timing issues. But let me know if it's not working because we can change it.
Okay. So hopefully you have our emails, so you can email either Jesse or I. We do talk to each other and see each other frequently, so that won't be a problem. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jesse.
Oh, no, I'm just nodding. Nodding assent.
I did have a question, but you can finish.
Yeah, if you have a question, Arity, we can dig in.
And I apologize if this is something that has been addressed because I came to this a little bit late, so I haven't read any of the background materials. But in the context of the project, are you looking for that to be more specifically directed at information literacy, or are you looking for that to be specific to our field? I mean, I can think of ways to apply both of these frameworks to just regular problem solving or a regular lecture piece within physics or mathematics or philosophy. So I'm curious about what you're looking for those projects and what we should be thinking about.
It's actually more applied to your teaching. So what we want to be reflective about in this process is how we're teaching and scaffolding development for students. And you do not have to use both frameworks, and you don't have to use all of a framework. You're just going to be choosing an aspect of it to kind of test out something in your spring semester. So you'll be taking an assignment or a way that you approach something, and you'll develop that for spring. And it is a scholarship of teaching and learning approach to that. So we will need to get IRB approval, because we do plan to disseminate the results of whatever we find. And I don't want you to scare you away if it feels very formal, because Sylvia and I are going to walk through the whole process over the next 3 or 4 months, so that it's not going to be like a surprise in January. Most of this community of practice is actually taking these bits of information and applying them to this project. So that's why we have 9 months to work together.
Sure. That's helpful, because just the idea of we're not revising an entire course or an entire semester long project. It's just a unit.
As little or big as you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
An example for me, Jessie can smile, because I'm sure she remembers the day I walked in and was talking about students' inability to do an annotated bibliography, no matter how much information scaffolding I gave them. So that's where I started. By the end of my project, they will know how to annotate a bibliography. Now it morphed into something way different by the time I ended, but that was really bothering me when I walked in and started, and that was where I started my journey. So, and as I said, it ended up in a way different place, much better place.
And I just want to speak to the librarians who are probably listening now or listening after the fact and during the recording. You know, we get a little bit uncomfortable because we don't have a course to test something out in. So, you know, this kind of change and project can be done with a one-shot library session if that's what you choose. Or if you want to kind of loop in a faculty instructor partner and work them through a course, I can talk to you about different ways that I've used this framework, and that will work just fine for a project as well.
Sandra, do you have any thoughts?
Other than it's time for class, and I'm listening to this and thinking I have done SOTL for so many years, but I'm on sabbatical in the spring. And so I'm still going to be able to apply things. I just won't necessarily be able to get all the data.
Oh, that's
because
fine.
my sabbatical is to update and revise my current textbook and my labs to be an online interactive system. So you can see that I have many opportunities for application for both frameworks.
Yep.
And the testing with an actual live class of students is going to have to take a little longer.
Sure.
Also, I'm unlikely to be willing to wait till January to start some things. So my library assignment for the class I'm going to teach in the next 30 seconds is starting next week. And I'm thinking, well, why not apply this framework now?
Excellent. Yay. You go.
Yep. So I've got a lot of background in the RSD, but the library one, other than the information literacy standards for psychology students, I hadn't seen the other before. So it gives lots of opportunities. Thanks.
That's where after I got comfortable with the RSD, incorporating in the information literacy framework really made a difference for me. So I hope you have a bit of fun exploring that.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to class.
Good luck with class. Thanks, Sandra. Anything else?
Yeah, all we have is this left.
Okay, any questions?
I think we did that.
And wave.
Oh, thank you guys for coming today. Looking forward to connecting with you again soon.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have a good day.
Have a good day.
Yep,
Bye.
bye. I'm going to stop the recording, Jessie.
Okay.
Bye.